Since Thursday, Hurricane Irma has been gaining strength, and it's now classified as a Category 5 storm. The National Hurricane Center's designated warning area includes the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. There are also 2 predictive models that suggest Florida could fall into the storm's path. It's too early to tell, though, if it will actually make landfall in the U.S. The storm formed off the coast of western Africa last week and has been moving toward the Caribbean Sea ever since.
The eye of Hurricane Irma, now a dangerous Category 5 storm, the most powerful seen in the Atlantic in over a decade. It's now barreling toward the Caribbean and southern United States. Irma threatens deadly winds of up to 285 kilometers per hour, as well as storm surges and flooding. In Pembroke Pines, Florida, residents stocked up on emergency supplies, hoping to be prepared when Irma's effects are felt later this week. People waited in long lines for petrol and groceries, all too aware of the destruction the storm could bring. The U.S. states of Texas and Louisiana were pummeled by Category 4 Hurricane Harvey just last week. Governor Rick Scott has declared a state of emergency for all of Florida, and mandatory evacuation orders have been issued for visitors in Miami and the Florida Keys.
Dozens of wildfires are raging through parts of the western United States. Fires in the Pacific Northwest forced evacuations in Oregon and Washington. A major interstate in Oregon remained closed Tuesday, September 5th, due to fires in the Columbia River Gorge. Meanwhile, in Washington, the air quality in some parts has been labelled as hazardous. On Saturday, Washington Governor Jay Inslee declared a state of emergency for Washington as a whole. The flames are also posing a risk to 2 well-known national parks. Winds have helped spread the flames toward Glacier National Parks in Montana and Yosemite National Park in California. Firefighters are now scrambling to protect some of the country's biggest and oldest sequoia trees. Meanwhile, rainfall on Sunday helped firefighters tackle what the Los Angeles mayor had called the biggest fire in the city's history. For United News International, I'm Rachel Latham.
A team of researchers have begun working to unravel the mystery which caused an alarming number of sperm whales to beach themselves in Europe's North Sea last year. Whales entering the sea's shallow waters, where their internal solar-like systems ceased to work, causing them to become stranded and die. At the time, scientists didn't understand why the whales entered the dangerous shallows. Now a team from the University of Kiel in Germany believes that the whales became stranded due to solar storms disrupting the Earth's geomagnetic field and knocking out the whales' sense of direction. However, as the BBC notes, the research merely offers a plausible explanation and a hypothesis about a single event that would be difficult to prove.
Over Labor Day weekend, Elon Musk sent out a series of tweets about World War III, stating his concerns about artificial intelligence. In one tweet, he wrote that North Korea should be low on our list of concerns for civilizational existential risk. Musk wrote that he believes competition for AI superiority at a national level will be the most likely cause of World War III. His predictions were in response to a comment made by Russian President Vladimir Putin, who said, "Artificial intelligence is the future not only of Russia but of all mankind. Whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world."
On Tuesday, a top North Korean diplomat warned that his country is ready to send more gift packages to the United States. Han Tae-sung, an ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva, confirmed that North Korea had successfully conducted its 6th and largest nuclear bomb test on Sunday. At a disarmament conference, Han said that the U.S. will receive more gift packages from my country as long as it relies on reckless provocations and futile attempts to put pressure on the DPRK. The United States and other world powers have struggled for a response to Pyongyang's missile tests, as sanctions have done very little to stop North Korea from boosting its nuclear and missile program.
On Tuesday, South Korea made an agreement with the United States to scrap the weight limit on its warheads to better respond to North Korea's nuclear and missile threat. The move comes after the North conducted its 6th and largest nuclear test 2 days ago. South Korean officials believe more tests are possible, despite international outrage over Sunday's nuclear test and calls for more sanctions against it. A source reported that North Korea was observed moving a rocket that appeared to be an intercontinental ballistic missile towards its west coast. Both the U.S. and South Korean president have agreed for bigger missiles to defend itself with greater force.
Russia condemns these exercises by the DPRK. We think that they are of a provocative nature, but we also cannot forget what I've just said in relation towards Iraq and then Libya. And the DPRK will definitely not forget this as well.
Over the weekend, North Korea's claims to have developed a new hydrogen bomb capable of reaching the United States has prompted condemnation from nearly the entire world. However, the world's most powerful nations can't seem to agree on how to respond. Donald Trump's administration has repeatedly called for further sanctions and threatened military action against Pyongyang. South Korea, which stands to lose the most in a North Korean war, has also called for increased sanctions, while the country has also fired missiles into the sea to simulate an attack on the north, according to a report from the Associated Press. While Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned of a global catastrophe if nations continue to issue military threats against North Korea.
On Tuesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin warned that increasing military hysteria around North Korea's nuclear and missile tests may lead to a global catastrophe. During a visit to China, Putin told reporters, "In this situation, pressing on military hysteria will not bring anything. This may end up in a global catastrophe and huge amount of human life lost." Putin went on to question the effectiveness of tightening sanctions around North Korea, saying the rogue nation would rather eat grass than abandon its nuclear program as long as they do not feel safe.
British retailer John Lewis is facing a public outcry after the clothing company removed gender qualifiers from their children's clothing sections. From comments like "let boys be boys, let girls be girls," and frustration with the political correctness of the left, to an endless amount of customers threatening to take their business elsewhere, one look at the retailer's Facebook page shows how averse the world is to the notion of opening up accepted perspectives on gender. Good Morning Britain host Piers Morgan led the backlash, taking to Twitter to express his confusion and accusing John Lewis of trying to turn the planet into a gender-neutral planet, which according to Morgan should not be allowed to happen, citing the empirical fact that none of his sons have shown any interest in wearing dresses. The controversial host concluded that other kids must feel the same. John Lewis, which has 50 stores across the UK, was the first major British retailer to go gender neutral with its children's clothing, labeling its clothes for girls and boys or boys and girls instead of using traditional binary labels.
Australia's High Court has begun hearing a legal challenge against the government's plan to hold a postal vote on whether to legalise same-sex marriage. The ruling centre-right coalition came up with the idea for the non-compulsory ballot after twice failing to get parliamentary support for a national referendum on the issue. Critics, including gay rights groups, are calling for just a conscience vote in Parliament to avoid divisive campaigning.
We hope the matter will go back to Parliament, and we hope finally our federal Parliament will stop delaying, stop dragging this out, and finally deliver on the settled will of the Australian people to allow all Australians to be able to marry the person they love in the country that they love.
Polls show more than 60% of Australians, including the Prime Minister, support same-sex marriage. But Malcolm Turnbull faces a revolt among the Conservative wing of his party if he goes back on a campaign pledge to hold a national ballot on the issue. We demand equality! And a court ruling against him could be destabilising for the government, which has a parliamentary majority of just one. Ballot papers are due to be sent out in a couple of weeks.
In Italy, malaria has claimed the life of a 4-year-old girl, raising fears that the mosquito-borne disease has returned to the country after decades. Sonia Zago developed a high fever upon returning from a vacation in Bibione, a seaside town on the Adriatic coast near Venice. Despite being rushed to a hospital in the northern city of Trento, within an hour, the girl had fallen into a coma and was diagnosed with malaria. Zago was transferred to a hospital that treats tropical diseases in Brescia, but she died later Sunday night. Questions about how the young girl contracted the disease have raised alarm, as the girl had never traveled to a malaria-prone country. On Tuesday, Reuters reported that the U.S. Environmental Agency is considering a ban on sprayings of the agricultural herbicide dicamba after crop damage was linked to the weed killer. Farm growers across the U.S. have reported the chemical drifted from where it was sprayed this summer, damaging millions of acres of soybeans and other crops. The ban could hurt the companies who sell dicamba weed killers and soybean seeds with the dicamba-tolerant trait. The Environmental Protection Agency discussed a deadline for next year's sprayings and taking the necessary steps to prevent a repeat of the damage.
A boat ride is still the safest, driest way into this Houston neighborhood where Judy Bott's house is being torn apart. Like an estimated 30,000 homes in this area, everything that was flooded has to come out. Toxic mold, which can lead to respiratory illness, grows fast. 10 days after Hurricane Harvey hit Texas, it's not a safe work environment. Volunteers wear masks and watch for broken glass and rusted nails.
We have to be very careful. Yeah.
You're going to make sure everybody working here gets a tetanus shot.
Well, I'm going to do my best. Yeah. I'm not going to give it to them, but I'm going to send them to get it.
Across the flooded street, Trish and Buddy Hagner say they'll get tetanus shots too. Mold is already growing on their discarded furniture, and they know there's more inside their walls.
We're a one-story house. It creeps up fast, and the longer it takes to get in and get approval for anything, the worse it gets.
Floodwaters could contain bacteria, dead animals, even diluted sewage. Any cut or bruise brings a risk of infection. And Houston's hot summer weather will make areas like this perfect mosquito breeding grounds, increasing the chances of West Nile virus, dengue, and other insect-borne diseases. And there are broader concerns outside the standing water and persistent flooding in residential neighborhoods like this one. The Environmental Protection Agency has identified 13 different Superfund sites, toxic waste sites, that have been flooded out or otherwise damaged by Hurricane Harvey. And the extent of the impact on public health or water quality at those sites simply isn't known. At the nonprofit Air Alliance of Houston, there's concern about increased industrial air pollution because petrochemical plants and refineries would have vented chemicals and gases before the storm for safety. There are fears, too, of more pollution as they start back up.
We know that it triggers asthma. We know that it triggers other respiratory illnesses. It can cause irritation of the eyes, the nose, the throat.
Doctors say the long-term post-Harvey health hazards are mental, not just physical. The storm affected everybody.
It didn't matter what socioeconomic background or status, it hit all of our neighborhoods, and it's going to be very stressful, and it's going to take quite a while for us to recover. So we're concerned about the mental health of our population, and there are resources out there for them.
It's clear the water will recede in a matter of days or weeks, but challenges to public health will persist far longer. Alan Schaffler, Al Jazeera, Houston.
Buthaina Muhammad Mansour is believed to be 4 or 5 years old. She's the sole survivor of a Saudi-led coalition airstrike on her family's apartment building in Sana'a on August 25th. Her 5 siblings and her parents were all killed. A UN human rights report is calling this the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. It's been tracking deaths like that of the Mansour family since March 2015 and says the conservative death toll has climbed to 5,100 civilians, including 1,200 children.
It is clear that the findings of our office indicate that serious violations of international humanitarian law have taken place in Yemen. War crimes may have been committed, but OHCHR is not in a position to confirm this.
The UN calls Yemen an entirely man-made catastrophe. 2 factions are fighting for control, the Houthis and allies of former President Ali Abdullah Saleh against Yemen's internationally recognized government and the Saudi-led coalition. The UN says Saudi coalition airstrikes are responsible for the majority of civilian deaths. It says they've hit schools, hospitals, markets, even funerals like this one, which killed more than 140 people in Sana'a last October. The Houthis don't have air power, but in the report they are accused of recruiting children to fight. Human rights monitors in Yemen say they frequently observe children as young as 10 armed and uniformed, guarding Houthi checkpoints. The civilian cost of the war doesn't stop at the battlefield. It has pushed nearly 7.3 million people to the brink of famine. 60% don't know where their next meal will come from. More than 600,000 have been infected in the world's largest cholera outbreak, with 3,000 new cases every day. The UN says Saudi Arabia should finance all humanitarian needs going forward.
There are minimal efforts towards accountability in the past year by all parties to the conflict have been insufficient.
The UN is also calling for an international investigation to provide accountability and answers to children like Buthaina. Charlotte Ballas, Al Jazeera.
More casualties in the siege of Marawi City on the southern Philippine island of Mindanao. Emergency workers buried another 28 bodies of civilians and some suspected Islamic rebels on a hillside. Local officials say almost 90 bodies have been placed in mass graves since June, and more are expected as fighting continues. Large parts of the predominantly Muslim city have been occupied by Islamic militants since May, and more than 800 people have already been killed, most of them rebels. Mindanao has a history of Muslim separatist rebellion, and President Duterte has placed the island under martial law until the end of the year.
CNN has reported that 4 British soldiers alleged to be members of banned UK neo-Nazi group National Action have been arrested on suspicion of preparing acts of terror. The men were detained as part of a pre-planned and intelligence-led operation, according to West Midlands Police, who said there was no threat to public safety. All 4 suspects are being held by police. A spokesman for the British Army confirmed the arrests. The men, aged 22, 24, 24, and 32, are from England and Wales.
A 106-year-old Afghan woman faces deportation after being denied asylum in Sweden. Bibahal Uzbeki arrived in Europe with her family 2 years ago, traveling by foot over mountains, deserts, and forests. Uzbeki was carried much of the way. According to her grandson, Uzbeki suffered a debilitating stroke after learning her asylum request was denied. He tells the Associated Press they tried to keep it a secret, but his grandmother knew because his sisters were crying. But the Swedish Migration Agency told the AP, quote, "Generally speaking, high age does not in itself provide grounds for asylum. Some Afghan asylum seekers have reportedly been turned away by European nations based on where in Afghanistan they lived. But the head of the Swedish network of refugee support groups told the AP that many places being cited as safe are not. Uzbeki's family is now appealing the decision. For United News International, I'm Matt Paul.
For allegedly abusing prisoners by throwing feces and urine on them, 4 California sheriff's deputies were arrested last week on felony assault charges. The East Bay Times reported that Alameda County deputies Justin Lynn, 23, and Eric McDermott, 27, have been charged with felony assault under the color of authority, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Deputy Sarah Krause and former deputy Stephen Sarkos resigned during the investigation. They have been charged with felony assault under the color of authority. According to prosecutors, the deputies told prisoners to throw bodily fluids on others. The practice is known as gassing.
The surge of Rohingya Muslims fleeing violence in Myanmar's Rakhine state and seeking refuge in neighbouring Bangladesh has reached at least 125,000. The exodus and consequent suffering of men, women and children has prompted the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, to send a rare letter to the 15-member Security Council warning of a human catastrophe.
We are receiving constant reports of violence by Myanmar security forces, including indiscriminate attacks. These will only further increase radicalization. It's no longer possible to delay an effective action plan to address the root causes of the crisis. It will be crucial to give the Muslims of Rakhine State either nationality or, at least for now, a legal status that will allow them to have a normal life.
Guterres also warned a risk of ethnic cleansing could have implications for peace and security in the region. The 1 million or so Muslim Rohingya in Myanmar have long complained of persecution in the Buddhist-dominated country. The current crisis follows attacks by Rohingya insurgents. Myanmar says its security forces are fighting a legitimate campaign against terrorists.
Protests have taken place in Los Angeles and more are expected across the US as young immigrants fight to keep protections President Donald Trump has vowed to scrap. The Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program protects those brought into the country illegally as children. Trump could still change his mind, but it's predicted he'll rescind the Obama-era scheme, giving Congress 6 months to draw up new legislation.
We are more than 800,000 individual recipients that were brought to this country without our own consent or our own will. We pretty much just follow our parents. You know, they wanted to give us a better future in this country, something they couldn't afford back in Mexico.
DACA means a lot to me because it actually supports me to keep going to school, to prepare myself to become someone in the future. It gives us a permit to work, to go to school, because it is expensive and we do need that support. And for him to do it, it is really important for us to feel support from our president and from our country.
DACA protects around 800,000 young men and women, often referred to as dreamers. It was created by President Obama in 2012 after Congress failed to pass legislation that would have created a pathway for citizenship for undocumented youth.
They call them the Dreamers, but the dream may be about to turn sour. As the undocumented migrants protested outside the White House, the US Attorney General was announcing the end of their legal protection.
We are people of compassion and we are people of law. But there is nothing compassionate about the failure to enforce immigration laws. Enforcing the law saves lives, protects communities and taxpayers, and prevents human suffering.
Until now, children of illegal immigrants have benefited from an executive order signed by the previous President Barack Obama, which has allowed them to stay and work in the US. But people like Humberto Marquez, who arrived at the age of 6, now face being deported.
Our government doesn't realize that we have so much potential. We're already contributing to this country, and I don't want to put it in a way that, oh, we're contributing economically. We're just people. We're human beings.
Opinion polls suggest there is broad support for the Dreamers to stay in America. And business leaders say that with the US economy at nearly full employment, they're needed as part of the workforce. But there are other groups who are equally determined that they should leave. 9 Republican-controlled states had threatened to take legal action if the administration didn't act to end the Dreamers scheme. But there will be a 6-month delay before the new legislation is implemented to give Congress a chance to resolve the issue.
We know that this act is an act of cruelty. When Trump said that he had a big heart for dreamers and that he was going to act with kindness, he's not acting with kindness by creating this delay. Killing the program is still killing the program.
And with Congress deeply polarized and with a full agenda already, the Dreamers fear their cause might not get a proper hearing. John Brain, TRT World, Washington.
At a kosher supermarket in Paris, a quick-thinking Muslim employee hides several Jewish shoppers in the basement before sneaking out to brief police on the hostage-taker upstairs. In the town of Damartin-Gual, a poker-faced businessman fools a pair of gunmen into believing they're alone in the building before being allowed to leave unharmed. In the days after the bloody end of twin French hostage crises Friday, stories of life-saving courage are beginning to filter out. One of the most striking is the story of Lassana Bathily, a young immigrant from Mali who literally provided police with the key to ending the hostage crisis at the supermarket. Bathily was in the store's underground stock room when gunman Amedi Koulibaly burst in upstairs, according to accounts given to French media and to a friend of Bathily's who spoke to the Associated Press. Bathily turned off the stockroom's freezer and hid a group of frightened shoppers inside before sneaking out through a fire escape to speak to police. Initially confused for the attacker, he was forced to the ground and handcuffed. Once police realized their mistake, he provided them with the key they needed to open the supermarket's metal blinds and mount their assault.